Welcome to Not Entirely Unlike Tea with Christine Collins. Hey there, it's Christine Collins, and I have a fun topic for us today around the subject of shadow work, subpersonas, and another subject that comes up for people really often, which is self-sabotage. Now, a lot of times, the popular conception of self-sabotage is along the lines of wanting to do something or wanting to achieve a goal or to move closer towards a desire, but feeling as though you are actually holding yourself back or some part of you is stopping you from moving forward. Now, I think there's a little bit of a popular misconception that self-sabotage means that you have some kind of evil little genius inside you that's actually trying to trip you up and harm you and stop you and prevent you from achieving success and happiness and love and all of those things. But I would like to offer an alternative perspective on how we might look at this with some very tangible, concrete solutions for what to do if you happen to notice that going on. So now this is also tied in conjunction with the notion of having a shadow side or a shadow self and doing shadow work. And much of this stems from the work of Carl Jung, who is a well-known psychotherapist, and some other schools of thought coming from the NLP realm around subpersonas. Now, subpersonas are little portions of ourself that have kind of broken off from our conscious selves, our conscious whole, so not that different from the concept of having a shadow. The shadow is known as the undesirable traits and qualities in ourselves that we have repressed or suppressed in some way because they were unacceptable to the common society, the common notion of how we should be or how we think we're supposed to be. So shadow traits can range for each person depending upon their belief system and how they were brought up and certain things in their culture, things that they were taught or led to believe are bad or wrong. And so that certainly can be quite variable across cultures and across individuals. So there's not specific traits that would be falling into the shadow category. In some cultures, it may be acceptable, for example, for women to be very assertive, and in other cultures, it may not be. And so the shadow could be comprised of the trait that is frowned upon, or that individual is frowning upon, and therefore is trying to kind of push down or squash or suppress. Shadow qualities can also tie to things like aggression, jealousy, some of the less attractive traits and qualities that we have. But there's also a connection between like what we would consider a selfish desire versus a desire to be very giving and very generous. And sometimes those things can come to conflict. And that is where the subpersona comes into play. So rather than looking at the shadow or the subpersona as this inner part of ourselves that's trying to harm us or to stop us from being successful, being happy, going after our goals and our desires, it's a lot more constructive to just simply see it as a portion of you that has a need or goal of its own that may sometimes seem like it's coming into conflict with the conscious goals that you have set for yourself. So sometimes this comes up where we set something out to get something done, to achieve a certain task or to complete a project. And there is a part of us that consciously wants to achieve that goal or to move forward with that desire or that task. And another part of us that seems like it's trying to hold us back or stop us from doing the tasks that we need to get there. But I would present to you the possibility that that subpersona or portion of you actually just has a different need that's not being met. And that once we can have a conversation with all of those different competing parts, we can come up with solutions where every part of you can be satisfied. Now, that's not to say that you don't occasionally have to pick and choose and prioritize this need over that need, but there is a way that we can integrate all of this together effectively so that you can have more of your needs actually being met and still be progressing towards that goal. So as an example, if you catch yourself stopping work on a project or a task, there may be a subpersona, a little portion of yourself that actually needs something else that's not being met. There could be a need for rest. there could be a need to take breaks. There could be a need for relaxation that is not being met. And so what's happening is it's rising up and kind of happening without your conscious permission, where you're taking the break, you're taking the rest, you're catching yourself scrolling on socials or cleaning the kitchen or organizing the pantry or something that's not aligned with that conscious task or project or goal that you've lined out for yourself, and you're doing the other thing instead. So by noticing that, increasing your awareness is really huge and very helpful. Just mindfully observing, like, that's interesting that I'm doing this thing instead of the project that I had set out for myself today. And then noticing what is the underlying need or goal of that part of you. So most of the time, I feel as though we are like raging at that part of ourselves. We beat up on ourselves. We're putting down that desire, that tendency to go and watch Netflix or to relax or to read a book or to organize the pantry. And we're condemning that sub-persona, that part of you. Instead of doing that, what if you were to just have an open dialogue and examine, what is it that this part of me needs? Is it that I need more creativity? Have I fallen down a Canva rabbit hole and I'm creating all this stuff because I actually need a way to express my creativity in a constructive way instead of doing these sort of procrastination type things? And can I choose to intentionally pursue that need, that creativity, instead of accidentally falling down the rabbit hole? And by doing that consciously, what you're doing is you are bringing the subconscious or the unconscious parts of you up out into the surface and into the conscious realm, where you now have choices. You now have conscious capability to address those issues. And that's one of the things with shadow work, is that it's about bringing the unconscious into the conscious realm by noticing, by observing, and most importantly, by not judging and by not condemning those parts of yourself that are emerging, allowing them to exist and figuring out, is there a more constructive way that I can address this situation and to problem solve and come up with real solutions to prevent this from stifling my goals and desires. So a few practical strategies, and you can kind of pick and choose and mix and match depending on you and the types of things that work the best for you. So the first piece is mindfulness. Observation, noticing, and awareness. Paying attention to what you're doing when, even if you don't change the behavior at all, simply noticing what you're doing and what's happening. What are the emotions that are present as you're accidentally organizing the pantry? Are you sitting there feeling crappy about yourself? Are you beating up on yourself? What are the feelings that are rising up for you in those moments? Just observing. So not changing, just observing. And then from there, once you start to have the awareness, now you have some clay to mold and to play with. So identifying the emotions, pinning down, is there anything in particular that may have precipitated that behavior? So sometimes we do things when we're actually upset about something else. So if you had a negative exchange with someone, or you got an email with unhappy news or something that was like even mildly irritating, it does not have to be a big, grandiose emotional challenge, just something that threw you off a little bit. Sometimes we kind of go dopamine seeking, meaning that we go into an activity that we know we can achieve an immediate hit of positive emotion. So we get a little bit of an immediate gratification by reorganizing, by cleaning, by playing around in Canva or watching Netflix. There's an immediate sense of gratification that can sometimes be a little pick-me-up after a negative emotional experience. And so sometimes it's actually about that. And then you can go back in and address whatever that emotion was and the trigger for that emotion and see if there's something else you can do to take care of that emotion. Now, of course, we have tools. We have EFT and tapping. We have hypnosis. You may have many other mindset tools of your own at your disposal, things that tend to pick you up and help you to resolve any emotional challenge that's coming into your day. You can can also notice if there were shadow elements that were triggered or brought to the surface by that precipitating event or exchange. So sometimes the situation or the interaction brings up something icky that doesn't feel good about ourselves. It brought forward our anger. It brought forward jealousy. It brought forward something unpleasant that we've actually repressed in ourselves that just didn't feel good. And so we go off on that dopamine-seeking behavior. Now, you can also have a dialogue with the subpersona, and you can do this either as a visualization or as a journaling prompt, where you kind of go back and forth and ask that part of yourself, the part of you that's doing the thing that you're not happy with, eating the cheese or eating the cake or cleaning the kitchen or organizing the pantry or playing in Canva or on Netflix. So have a conversation with that subpersona and asking it, hey, what are your goals? What is it that you need satisfied here? And determine as a collaboration, is there something else that could happen that would allow that subpersona to also get its needs met? So let's just say it's creativity that's lacking. I notice in myself when I'm not doing creative pursuits, my brain will find a way for me to be creative whether I asked it to or not. And so examples of how this has manifested for me in the past are being in a very rigid, strict corporate culture environment and color coding all of my Excel spreadsheets. Even though it was not necessary to do that for the job, I needed something visual and pretty because I also wasn't getting my creativity needs met in that environment in any other way. So sometimes it's something like that. And so then the conversation you can have is, how can I constructively do this? So is there a way that you can apply your creativity to your goal or your project? So the way that I make that work for me is, for example, when I'm designing a webinar, I don't really enjoy all of the admin and the backlog work that goes into doing all the email sequences and making all the stuff and doing all of the planning and the marketing. And so for me, I get to have a reward. And my reward when I run a webinar is I'm allowed to make new images and graphics. And that is a way for both things to happen. So my goal is to run a webinar, to make it really good, to be very effective for my business. But the creative side of me needs to have its needs met also, and it gets to have the opportunity to make new images and graphics for the webinar, whether it's the slides or the swag or all of those things. And by doing that, I have brought together those two competing elements, and the webinar is still getting done. And the other side of me is also getting satisfied. So it's kind of like a collaboration. How can you find a way to meet the need of the thing that's kind of popping up for you and standing in the way right now? How can you refocus it into your bigger picture goal or project? And so in addition to increasing your mindfulness, having that conversation with those competing parts and addressing the need of the subpersona, you can also take a broader scale look at which activities in your business or in your life with your goals and projects deplete you and which elevate you. Which things are kind of bringing you down and which things are bringing you up, and figuring out how to balance those things out. So if you find it really tedious work to create your newsletter or to do your content, or in my case, like I described with the webinar, is there a way you can make that task or activity more interesting, more fun, and get more invested in it by adding a component or removing a component that can help to elevate you and kind of balance out the pieces that are depleting you? Now, of course, there are some things you can also outsource, and so that's a worthy consideration. But if you're in a position where you're just doing it all yourself, you can find ways to mitigate the pieces that feel the most tedious and create ways that make it fun without getting totally derailed. So like my example of doing the images for the webinar, that's more constructive towards my end goal of doing the webinar than it would be for me to reorganize my pantry or clean the kitchen or things that aren't related to the goal or the desire. and making a little list for that awareness. This is what I do. This is why I think I'm doing it. Here's the rationale. This is what I think is happening below the surface. Here's the meaning that it has. Here's what's going on for me behind the scenes. These are some of the effects that it has on me or on my project or my goal. And here's my new plan of action. This is what I'm going to try to do going forward. And then sharing about it, like talking about it if you're in different groups or if you have biz besties or someone else in your world that you can converse about it with, you're still bringing it up into the conscious realm. And that helps you to kind of pull it out of the shadows, bring it out into the light where you can continuously examine it and rejig the plan as you go. So I hope you found this to be really helpful and informative. Once again, I'm Christine Collins. You can always check out my work further at transformcreate.com. As you may already know, I do have a hypnosis membership, which is a very valuable tool when you find yourself in some of these mindset ruts. You can pull out a hypnosis and about 15 to 20 minutes later, feel a whole lot better than whatever is troubling you in the moment. And until we connect the next time, I wish you a most magical and creative rest of your day. Thanks for listening. This is Christine Collins at transformcreate.com.